Today I'm going to consider making substantial revisions to this piece around a center. I've been working on the ending of the piece for some time, and I think I'm happy with it. It's certainly become more sophisticated and more fleshed out with each iteration. I've done now at least 5 different endings, and I do think that each one is an improvement on the previous one, even though they are kind of changing along the way. So it's not always like a direct improvement, but it's kind of clearly trending up in terms of the quality of these different endings. And now I'm looking at the whole piece and starting to think about what kind of revisions I could do throughout the piece. I believe very strongly in revision as an integral component of the creative process or the compositional process. And as I've said before, I know that using the word "the" is an error when speaking about a creative process. I know there is no such thing as the creative process. So if I say that, it's more of a slip of a tongue than anything. It really should be, I should be saying my creative process, and even that is a little bit misleading because my creative process is not fixed. I don't know if it's even really mine per se. It's just a creative process that I'm sort of always trying to understand and work in or whatever. So the language is a little imprecise, but I'll say the creative process with due apologies and certainly not trying to insinuate that this is anyone else's creative process or that it should be or anything like that. So that's my caveat for when I say the creative process. In any case, I believe that revision is an integral component of the creative process, and I do believe that some of the best material does come in the revision. And I do believe that this is true across many media. I think there are many examples of this, some famous examples of this. Like there's a video on YouTube called like How Star Wars Was Saved in the Edit. It's pretty fascinating, and just this idea that even after all of the material for that movie, Star Wars: A New Hope, even after all of the material had been shot, the movie was still very far from being the wonderful movie that we know today, and that much of what made that movie great happened, not on the set, but in the editing room. So I think that's true for composing as well, and I know that that's been the case for many of my musical compositions. That I had like a draft that was pretty strong, and then I went through several revisions, in which time the piece changed significantly. Sometimes I cut a lot of material, sometimes I added a lot of material, sometimes I significantly reshaped the material. And at the time when you're doing that, it's a very scary process because you can feel like you're destroying the piece, and in a way you actually are, temporarily, right? You have to kind of pull it apart before you can remake it in what you hope is the like better version. So you have to not be afraid to dive into that. I get a lot of inspiration from Bob Ross, The Joy of Painting. I watch it all the time. On Roku, they have a whole channel that's the Bob Ross channel, so it's pretty much always playing on my TV. And one thing I remember about watching The Joy of Painting when I was a little kid is this feeling of terror that I would have when he would add something to the painting. And Bob Ross was such a wonderful exponent of a healthy creative process, because he would have this landscape. You can watch any episode, you'll see this pretty much every painting he does. This moment comes. He'll have a landscape that looks pretty nice. It's got enough detail, it's got enough stuff. He'll have painted like, say the sky and the mountains and maybe the lake, and you're like, looks good to me. And then he'll say something like, all right, now here comes the moment of courage, right? Now you have to really take a leap of faith. And he'll take, his big almighty bristle brush and just brazenly slash down across the canvas a smear of black or dark brown. And you're like, no, what have you done? You've ruined the painting. Oh no. But that's a tree, right? That's the beginning of a tree. And then there's several more trees and then a whole forest. And before you know it, what you thought was ruining the painting is all of a sudden literally another dimension that he's created in the painting, right? You had the background, you had the middle ground, but you didn't have the foreground. And when he started putting the foreground in, that first tree looked like a horrible error. It looked like a ruination of the painting. But you push through that, and then shortly, with some trust and some perseverance, you have the foreground, and now suddenly your painting is literally three-dimensional. So you do have to take that leap of faith, right? So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm like looking on the precipice, and sometimes I do need to psych myself up a little bit to get into that, because there is, I think, a real fear about getting into that stage of the piece. You're like, I have this piece. It took me a lot to get to it. I have, as you can see, 21 drafts of this piece that I've written over the past like 2 weeks or so. So that's not nothing. That's, so I'm on flow or draft 21. That's pretty significant work. And as you can see, the piece is also, in a lot of ways, pretty thoroughly fleshed out. I have basically all of the detail that I want to have for this material. I have the articulations, the phrase marks, the dynamics, the fingerings even. It's all there. So the idea of taking something like this that, to my eyes is already quite substantially fleshed out, the idea of taking it and then like pulling it apart is really scary, even a little painful. But I think I need to do it. I think I owe the piece this next stage. So I'm going to start with this scene from from Batman: The Dark Knight. There's a lot of wisdom in this movie. You can find wisdom in surprising places. And okay, this might seem a little off to some people, but I think that this scene actually has some potential for symbolic readings as far as the creative process goes. I think you could analyze this scene from all kinds of different perspectives and lenses and stuff like that, if you were to do a critical reading of it, that kind of thing. I just want to look at this scene for just a second from a standpoint of a creative person and argue. And again, I apologize if this is way too out there for anyone watching this, but I would argue here that Batman is going to be like one side of my creative mind, and the Joker is going to be the other side of the creative mind. And without saying any more, let's just watch a quick excerpt from the scene.
Have all these rules, and you think they'll save you?
It's in control. I have one rule.
Oh, then that's the rule you'll have to break to know the truth.
Which is?
So that's pretty much it. Just that quick little excerpt. The whole scene you could kind of break down in this way, but really it's this dialogue. I'll play it again because it goes by pretty quick.
First, have all these rules, and you think they'll save you?
It's in control. I have one rule.
Oh, then that's the rule you'll have to break to know the truth.
Which is?
So that exchange occurs in my mind in a way when I undertake revising a piece. It's and like, I guess you could probably put this in some kind of like Freudian language with like the ego and the id. I'm not really up on that kind of stuff, or I'm sure there's some way of like delineating these concepts, like according to some psychological terminology. I don't really know that stuff very well. My interests more lie in symbology and sort of metaphorical language. So if someone watching this is thinking, "Oh, you're talking about you're talking about the super ego or whatever," like I'm like, great, maybe I should learn that stuff eventually, but whatever. I see it as like Batman is the part of you that thinks I have to keep things in control. I have to abide by my principles and my rules, and even if it requires like the use of kind of strong arming force, like I'm gonna keep this, this piece, sort of like locked down, right? I don't want to let it get weird or out of control. The Joker is that side of your mind, of your creative mind, that is saying you're not going to get the results that you want as long as you are stuck with this system. This system that you think is so principled and that is going to save you is actually restricting you. And so, like in the case of this movie, Batman, it's kind of, we're dealing with issues of, ethics and morality and, good and evil and all that kind of stuff. But in a creative process, we actually have to give ourselves over to the Joker. We have to let the Joker be the one who's in control. Like Commissioner Gordon from outside the interrogation room asks, "Who's in control?" In the movie, it's a tense moment because we're afraid that Batman is going to start going over the dark side and becoming the Dark Knight, right? Like he's going to start becoming like the Joker and, ignoring his principles and, operating outside of his ethics and all that. And this would be a tragedy, the same tragedy that happened to Two-Face, right? Anyways, without explicating the sort of moral, like, situations of the movie, what happens in our creative process, it has to actually work basically that way, that we have to realize as Batman, as the, in control, like, sort of principled, whatever, force, we've gotten up to a certain point and we've gone as far as we can go with that set of principles and sort of restrictions that we've placed on ourselves. If we want to go further, like Joker says, to the truth, we now have to break those rules and let go of those principles and that sense of control, and let the Joker be in control. And by the way, the Joker, as he says throughout this movie, is never really in control. He sort of is, and his sense of control is really sort of giving things over to chance and chaos and anarchy. That's when the Joker is in control. He's sort of a mastermind, but in a way, he's more a mastermind of chaos, right? His mastermind plans are not to rule the world, but to basically, destroy the order of the world. As Michael Caine says, some men just want to watch the world burn, right? I do believe that that's an accurate summation of the Joker's character. Like, he doesn't have some mastermind plan to become, some new tyrant over Gotham. He wants to destroy Gotham and enjoy the show. In our creative work, we kind of have to be like the Joker. We kind of have to introduce chaos and chance and anarchy into this orderly system that we value so much. The difference is when we're playing with our compositions, our work, the danger, I would argue there's not significant danger of something actually being destroyed, for the very simple reason that we can keep all of our revisions, all of our different versions intact. We don't lose anything. We don't actually destroy anything by pulling the piece apart. If we find that the revisions have truly created a nightmare, a monster, like we've really made the piece worse and now it's no longer like viable, well, we still have the old version of the piece, or we better. And this is something I tell students, like always, 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 always save your revisions. Make as many different copies as you need to, especially if you're using a notation program and you're working directly into the notation program like Dorico or Sibelius. You have to save your revisions constantly. Don't save everything in one file that you're constantly overriding. That's like a terrible, terrible mistake in my view. I used to write all of my music by hand. for a long time, actually. For most of my compositional career until fairly recently. Within the past few years or so, I've sort of ditched the handwriting and gone straight to the computer, which I think is probably a mistake, and I'll probably take it upon myself to have the discipline and have the courage, I guess, to go back to writing by hand first and doing all of my composition onto paper with a pen, and then engrave later. I think I have to do that for all kinds of reasons I won't get into. I've ranted a little bit about how I think notation programs limit you in all kinds of ways, but I'll save that for another time. So here we are, about to give ourselves over to the Joker, give this piece over to the Joker. I have a safely tucked away version, which is draft 20, which is the version that I think I was working on last night. And I started, or in the last live stream, and I started revising the ending some more. So this is the most revised version of the ending that I've gotten up to. I don't think I showed this on the last live stream because I don't think I did this while I was live streaming. So this is the current version of the ending. I might as well start here and play this so that the listener can hear where we're up to at the end of this piece, because this is a fairly new development, and then we'll get into the revisions, the more substantial revisions within the piece that I'm going to start undertaking. So here's the ending, the current ending. Where should I start? Maybe I'll start all the way back at the retransition and recapitulation of the opening theme. So I'll start. It's hard to know where to start. I think I'll keep it simple, and I'll just start with when the opening theme comes back. So I'll start here at 86, and then play to the end. Sorry, I had an issue with my sound. I have to restart this. Let's do that again. All right, so there it is. I'm pretty happy with this ending. I still think it needs some more tweaking, but it's one important thing to know what kind of revisions you're about to undertake. So the revisions that I would do at the end at this point, I don't think are going to be major, and like that wasn't the case earlier. If we go back and look at previous versions of the ending, like which draft was it? Yeah, this draft 18 was one where as you can see, I experimented with a completely different way of ending the piece. Let me just play it so I don't talk about it too much, so you can just hear it. Oops, sorry, I had my mic on for all that, so the sound was probably bad. In any case, that's a very, very, very different way to end the piece. It almost makes the piece kind of have a different message or a different story altogether. I don't know. I can't overthink these things too much. I just have to feel it and write it. And I think when you're writing material, when you're writing new material and you feel compelled to generate a lot of material very quickly, like you feel like you're just listening and taking dictation, I think that's the sign that you're in the right place. You know, it's kind of like I struggle with insomnia, and I have for as long as I can remember, for my whole life. I've always had trouble sleeping, and I've tried everything you can think of, and you know, some things help, some things whatever. But the point is, you know, sleeping has always just been a struggle for me. I have a feeling of joy when I'm in bed and I'm starting to doze, when I start to become aware of my conscious thoughts sort of disconnecting and floating away. Like, I'm aware of it when it happens most of the time, because you know, I'm lying in bed and I'm thinking about all these things in a very sort of deliberate and you know, awake way, and I'm thinking and thinking and thinking. And then after a while, sometimes it takes hours and hours, sometimes it takes the better part of the whole night, but after a while, eventually, you know, my mind starts to quiet down, and the thoughts have a way of kind of not just ceasing, but really they start to kind of disconnect and become, well, you know, dreamlike. And oftentimes I'm sort of aware when I'm starting to dream. I've even had, you know, some kind of lucid dreaming experiences where, you know, I'm so aware that I am dreaming that I have a sort of feeling of agency within the dream, but it's very much a dream. And sometimes that happens as I'm falling asleep. And it's always a joyful moment for me, because I realize, oh, finally, I'm falling asleep. Like, this is, now I'm dreaming, and I can let myself, you know, relax into the sensation of dreaming. And so I think composing is very much like that, where when you're composing and your writing process starts to have a dreamlike quality, like you're not thinking about the music anymore. Somehow it's just sort of almost appearing on its own on the page. You're just this intermediary where, you know, your hands are, it's almost like auto dictation or whatever. It's like, you know, you kind of feel like your hand or whatever is just sort of being made to to do the movements, to put the notes on the page, and you're just sort of sitting back and just watching them appear. Like, you know, your hand is sort of just doing it on its own. It's hard to put into words, but people who create know what this feeling is like. You know, we typically call it something like the flow state or whatever. But anyways, if you have that feeling about material, I do believe that that's a sign that that material is good, almost always. Even if you have to end up cutting that material because it doesn't work in the piece, which happens a lot. Sometimes this material that you generated spontaneously and exuberantly in a flow state, sometimes you have to cut it because it doesn't work in the piece, but it's still good material. And oftentimes that material, when you cut it, ends up finding life in another piece, right? Or becoming the germ, you know, the seed of another piece. It's good in itself, right? So all this is to say that I had that feeling while I was writing this section, this new version of the ending. All of these arpeggios and the harmony and this little chime idea that kind of came out of nowhere, all this seemed to just kind of write itself. So I thought, yes, that's the sign. This is the ending that I want. The one that I showed just now, the what I'm calling recitative thing, this was very much a calculated, conscious choice to try something different, to have a different texture, to have a melody that's based on the original opening motive and it kind of sequences down diatonically and all that stuff. I thought about it. I thought it through. I executed my plan successfully, I guess, and I can play it and think, yeah, that's not bad. The listener might not even know the difference. The listener might not know that this was the very calculated, deliberate idea, and that this was the very free, spontaneous idea. It doesn't really matter in a way. Like, I'm not saying that with disdain for the listener. What I mean is that what matters ultimately is the quality and effect of the material, right? Your mental state while you were writing it um, is secondary, and that might seem like it goes against what I just said, but it doesn't, because you have to somehow evaluate if your material is successful. Like, you have to have some sense of it, right? That's how you know when to revise and what to revise and how to, like, what you're trying to do in your revision. So you do have to make some kind of judgment on your material. Like, we don't like to think that. We don't want to make value judgments on our material or other people's material, but it's necessary in order to, refine and improve a piece. So how do you know? That's a difficult thing for me. I frequently cannot tell if what I'm writing is good or bad or whatever. I really can't tell. I can only guess. And as I said, the flow state to me is a pretty reliable indicator of material being of good quality. Now, I'm going to flip to the other side again, because I have some books here for this live stream, because I reference books all the time, and I figured it would be good to start having them, handy at hand, so that I can actually, read from them. So the first one that comes to mind is this book, Several Short Sentences About Writing. I read this book for the first time probably about 15 years ago when I lived in Philadelphia, when I was an undergraduate student. And I remember vividly reading this book. I remember reading it on the subway. I remember being on the subway platform I took the MFL, which, if you know Philadelphia, the MFL is an elevated train for most of its run. So I remember being on the MFL, the platform, above the street, which, sometimes you have really cool views from those elevated platforms. So I just remember, being there on, a sunny day or whatever, and with my head just buried in this book. And when I was reading this book for the first time, it seemed like every single sentence was like a pearl of wisdom, and I wanted to underline every sentence or highlight every sentence in the book. As it is, I only highlighted the stuff that I thought was really especially important, and I was so adamant about it, I even did it kind of fiercely and in pen. Sorry to people who hate writing in books. I know writing in a book in pen is probably a sin, but oh well. I plan to keep this book for the rest of my life, so whoever gets it after me will have to deal with the pen. Anyways, the sentence I just showed that was fiercely pen marked was, most of the sentences you make will need to be killed. The rest will need to be fixed. This will be true for a long time. Oof, that's a tough pill to swallow. But the sentence that I wanted to share today, as it relates to where I am at in this particular piece, is this. This book is about writing prose, writing words, poetry and stuff, but much of it applies to creative process in general. A lot of it does have to do with writing specifically, but a lot of it is also good for the creative process. Again, the creative process. Okay. I might have to read a lot of this. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but I highly recommend you get this book if you're interested in the creative process, especially in writing. So I'm going to start on page 71 and read some sentences from this book. I'm going to skip around just a little bit, but it's about this idea of flow, and, well, let's let Mr. Klinkenborg speak. What lurks behind flow? Above all, the idea of naturalness. Natural is a word that invites suspicion. It should always present itself in quotation marks, a sign that its meaning is slippery. Humans can justify almost anything by calling it natural. Naturalness is the pervasive myth, the one to root out of your head. Okay, so he talks about naturalness as it pertains to writing, specifically for a bit, but let's skip forward. I'm skipping a page here. Natural, like flow, is also an effect in the reader's mind. I'm going to read that again. Natural, like flow, is also an effect in the reader's mind. It doesn't describe the act of writing. It describes the effect of writing. or I'll rephrase to put that another way, it doesn't describe the process that the writer experiences, it describes the process that the reader experiences. Yes, people will continue to believe that writing is natural. This harms only the writers who believe it themselves. I think that's clear enough, but I'm still going to rephrase in my understandings that don't worry too much about the way you feel when you're working on a piece and presuming that that feeling somehow translates into the listener's experience of the piece. You can write a piece and have it feel like an arduous slog, and it just took so much out of you and it was beating you up the whole time. And then when the listener hears it, their experience of that piece may very well be utter joy, bliss, spontaneity, total natural flow, kind of easy, just spontaneous creative existence, whatever, right? And the opposite can also be true. You can have a piece that just flows out of you all at once, and then to the listener it can sound jagged and labored and difficult and all these other things, right? There's not a clear, like, consistent correlation. You at the same time should trust your flow, I believe. I know these things might sound contradictory or paradoxical, but maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I think when you feel the flow, when you feel yourself in the flow, don't get in the way. Get out of the way and just let it happen, right? And you can worry about the material later, like whether it was good or not, but just let it come out. I find that when I let it come out, it tends to be good. That also goes to another book that I wanted to mention. This wonderful book by, Madeline L'Engle, Walking on Water. I have a number of books on the creative process. I've gathered them mostly here behind me. So just with the ones that I have in sight right now, books that I very much appreciate about the creative books that I appreciate about the creative process include Effortless Mastery by Kenny Werner, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, Free Play, I don't know how to say this person's last name, sorry, but Free Play, The Art of Practicing, which is more specifically about practicing an instrument, but has a lot of good stuff about, your creative kind of mindset. There are others that I can't remember right now. There are others that... Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is a good one. I don't know where that book went. I had it and I must have lost it. But Suzuki, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I think that's it. Or, yeah, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It's another one. There's a lot of good books about this stuff. I've recently discovered this book, Walking on Water, and it's blowing my mind. I'm a person of faith. That'll come up as I ramble in my live streams, I'm sure. But for now, I'll let Mrs. L'Engle speak to the subject. So here's this is another book that I wanted to underline and highlight almost every sentence. As you can see, I got a little carried away, like highlight an entire paragraph, You ever see that? Like a student, maybe you are this student, maybe I was this student, where they highlight like the entire textbook. It's like, wait, that doesn't serve the purpose of highlighting. That kind of defeats the purpose of it, right? Sometimes you're like, this is all so important, but you need to parse out information, right? If you're going to start highlighting. Well, here's a sentence that I underlined very firmly. Listen to the silence. Stay open to the voice of the Spirit. Listen to the silence. Stay open to the voice of the Spirit. That's probably enough for now. I think that's enough to get us started. The Joker, flow, the voice of the Spirit. Let's do some revisions. I'm going to mute myself and just play for a bit. Right, okay. Not my best playing of the piece. A lot of egregious slips, a bit sloppy. But obviously, I'm going to have to practice this piece before before I perform or record it. And it does have some technical challenges. Most of it lies under the hands very comfortably, which is something I pride myself on. That's a whole nother can of worms. I won't get into that. The relationship between, your musical material and like its physical execution. It's a very important relationship. But let's leave that for now. So most of this piece is fairly comfortable to play, even though it's challenging in some ways. It's also very idiomatic, so I believe. So, where should I start? First, I see some basic things I have to fix. This is not good. Why is it not letting me select this precipitando? Here's a Dorico thing. You always have to be in the right mode, and the right mode has sub-modes. Like if you're in the right mode, the right mode, I can't move this vertically because that's considered a graphical decision. Right? This is the way that Dorico organizes its way of doing things. So I cannot drag this precipitando down closer to the note because I'm in right mode. Okay, so you go over to engrave mode. Now I did switch to the right mode automatically, the correct mode automatically, which is nice. But previously I had been in vertical spacing mode, adjusting the vertical spacing of this system, which means when I clicked on precipitando, it didn't let me select it. I'm clicking on it, it's not doing anything. I just double clicked it, which took me back to right mode. And it's confusing to me for a second because I'm thinking, wait, but this is a vertical spacing issue. And why can't I select this object? Oh, the vertical spacing only applies to staff spacing. It even says it right there. So that is me being a dummy. But it's very annoying to me that, if I'm in engrave mode, if it doesn't occur to me that I'm in staff spacing mode, I'm like, why am I not able to click this? And then if I double click it out of frustration, it takes me back to right mode. And I'm like, what is going on? So anyways, Dorico, it really, really locks you down into you have to be in the right mode and you have to constantly be shuttling your thinking around. Like, all right, I'm in right mode. I see that this precipitando is hanging a little too high precariously over this system, over the staff. So if I go into engrave mode and I think, oh, I need to make some vertical spacing for it, then, oh no, I have to go to, what is it? Object mode? Graphic editing mode. Now I get to select it and move it around. That's what it's like working with Dorico. Multiply that thought process by about 1,000 different decisions every, or at least 100 decisions like that an hour, and it quickly becomes extremely mentally fatiguing to use this program because you're constantly thinking, okay, why is it not letting me do what I want to do? Like, what am I not, how am I not thinking correctly according to the program? It's an incredibly exhausting program to use, but you get good results, so I guess it's worth it. Obviously, I'm still using it, so I guess that says something. Anyways, I just want to fix the spacing on this page a little bit first. I might be dragging my feet about getting to the revisions. Maybe that's a sign of something. I don't know. I don't know if I need this pedal mark. I think it's possibly redundant. Maybe it doesn't need to go as far as it's going. I don't like having a pedal mark that's that long. I don't like it going across multiple systems, that's what I'm saying. So I just need to show the player that it's really important that they hold the pedal through these entire 2 bars so that low C rings out for a long time. And then here I could probably say continue ad lib as I've done before. I'm being a little fussy with my pedaling marks, as you can see. I really try not to be fussy with pedaling. I really trust the player when it comes to pedaling. Like, I believe the player knows how to pedal better than I could notate. So I really try to stay out of their way and let them, pedal as they see fit. But pedaling is part of the piece, right? And you do have to explicitly indicate pedaling when it's important that it be done a specific way. So that's a very fuzzy issue for composers writing for piano. Like, you have to choose. There's no one can tell you the correct way to notate pedaling. It really depends on what's important to you, what kind of music writing, and all these other things. So you have to figure out your system for communicating pedaling to a pianist. And everyone is going to do it a little bit differently. As long as it's consistent and clear, then you're good. So here, I've probably gone a little too far, which is, in my opinion, is good to err on the side of caution. Because if you don't give any information, then you could get, like, if I didn't have any pedal marking here, it's conceivable that a player would play it like this, right? Which is not what I want. I need it to be. But at the same time, I also don't want to have a pedal line that goes, across all of these lines, because that would be visually very clunky and really not necessary. Continue ad lib, solves the problem as far as I'm concerned. That combined with the laissez vibraire, however you say it, with the let ring ties here, should indicate to the player pretty clearly that this is all supposed to be pedaled and resonant. But just to cover my bases, I have a little asterisk with a footnote. Pedal marks are used when the pedal should be held for longer than might otherwise be intuitive, or simply when to change a pedal. That's not worded very well. Secco indicates when the pedal should not be used. Otherwise, the player should pedal ad libitum. So that does open me up to the possibility that a player would pedal ad libitum here and break the pedal, like, say, from this bar to this bar. Am I okay with that? I suppose. I don't know. It's all gray area at a certain point, and I'd really rather, like, give just enough information than exhaustively show every single possibility or every single thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm contradicting myself going back and forth here, but all that's to say, here, I want this continue ad lib here. This is one of those things where I kind of have to show it to a player, to be honest, to get a sense of if it makes sense to a player. Sometimes you just don't have all the information that you need on your own. Like, sometimes a lot of times actually, you really need to just consult with a player that you trust and have them tell you if it makes sense or not. So that'll come whenever I give this piece to another pianist, which will happen someday. Right, okay. Where was I? Oh, all right, revision time, Joker time. Folks, let's do it. I'm gonna play. This is the moment. This is the leap of faith moment. Let's do it. Let's try something different. Boy, oh boy. Am I a little nervous about it? Well, what do I have to be nervous about? Oh, God. Darko, please don't be such a... Hey, nope. Okay. Fine. Alright. Let's try it this way. We're going to save the original version of this idea, these 2 bars, which is kind of like a transitional idea. It's a little bit of passage work. We do still have this melody kind of continuing. No, I won't talk through it too much. I just need to write some things. One thing you can notice as I'm working on this is that Dorico really does not like to respect your overrides of its positioning parameters. This little Secco text box has gotten bumped around so many times. I have to keep putting it back in the right place because for some reason, whenever I change something, Dorico decides that now it has to be, in a different place, I guess. And again, it's one of those things, I don't want to call it a bug. Like, it's just how the program works, I guess. It's not a bug, it's a feature. There, look, I got rid of the fingering and it said, oh, that means I can reposition. It already shows that I have a manual override on its vertical position, right? But if I get rid of the, if I get rid of the fingering, whoa, what did I just do? What the fuck? Sorry. Oh, because I'm pressing Control F and I'm not in engrave mode, which has a different key command than in write mode. So if I get rid of the fingering, Control F, get rid of the fingering, now does it get rid of my override? No, it just, it keeps the same offset, but now it's offset from the note and not the fingering? I don't know. So you got to be really careful with that stuff. Dorico moves stuff around all the time. It just does not see this as fixed, like in this position on the page for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm sure someone can explain to me why that actually makes sense, and I'm just doing it wrong, but whatever. Okay, so here we are. We're starting to get a little funky with the piece. It's definitely changing. Added this little inner voice here, and now really rethinking what can happen at this spot in the piece. This is going to be a very, very different sound in the piece if I follow this idea through. I'm a little nervous about it. You might have just heard what Stravinsky called what did he call this? I'm thinking it's the happy accident, but that's a Bob Ross phrase. Happy accidents. But I think Stravinsky called it the same thing. And I wrote my doctoral dissertation on this, so I should remember the quote. My doctoral dissertation, if you care to look it up, it is out there on the internet. It's called Those Great Inspirers. And that's from a quotation by Stravinsky where he referred to his fingers, his hands, as those great inspirers. He said he never composes away from the keyboard because the fingers, the hands, are a wonderful creative tool in and of themselves, that they have a way of finding material without you like realizing it. And one way that they do that for you is by making a mistake while you're playing, where the mistake is actually the exciting new material that you weren't quite looking for, or you didn't know how to find it, but your hand gave it to you for free, as it were, by making a mistake. So I just played a mistake just now at measure 16. I was just experimenting with how to sort of resolve this chord. I do still believe in, functional harmony in my music. I know it's crazy. 2025, the year 2025, and, composers still write functional harmony. Am I hopelessly outdated and an old fuddy-duddy? Probably. But in any case, I still believe in, resolutions, even very traditional resolutions like this sus4 3 thing. So I was just playing around with that, and my pinky, good old pinky, slipped off of the F sharp onto a G. thank you. Thank you, Pinky. That's it. I don't need to interrogate it. I know it's right. Thank you. Thank you, hand. There we go. Now that's an idea I can get excited about. This one, I'm still not so sure about, but we're going to keep playing with it. We're going to transpose it. We're going to repeat it, transposed down an octave. Yikes. I don't know, man. I don't know. The problem with this idea is that if I do introduce it this early in the piece, I feel a sort of obligation to develop it somehow throughout the piece. And this is not a little idea. This is like throwing a hand grenade into the piece, because even though it looks like all I've done is like rewrite the left hand part, and I've transposed the right hand up an octave here, adjusted the material to transition into that, but the right hand goes up an octave from what it originally was, which is this version right here. The left hand is very different. Now it's these like staccato chromatic descending fourth E chords, whereas originally it was just a continuation of the E minor melody that led into this like sort of retransition back to the opening theme. So this creates a whole new world of possibilities for the piece with this chromatic staccato material. And so this, in a very real sense, is like a totally new idea that I've just thrown into the piece. And by the way, that I've thrown in right on the first page, which means that I could now go through this entire piece and find opportunities to reintroduce this idea in new forms, and to possibly have it develop. I mean, there could be a whole section of the piece that is the development of this idea, where it gets all over the place. It gets skittery and pointillistic and whatever. It's a very scary idea, because now the piece is suddenly looking like it could potentially expand dramatically from its current form of 9 pages to something a lot bigger, because it now has to make room for this idea. I don't know, man. I'm scared, but I gotta keep going. I gotta push through. This is that moment I was talking about earlier. This is the moment of putting the black smear on the canvas in front of your beautiful, pristine mountain, lake, sky landscape. I have it. I already have that, right? I have my mountain range with the sky and the lake in front of it. I'm wondering right now if there is a foreground that I haven't yet, sort of ventured into in this piece, and this is my first go at, as Bob Ross would say, kind of taking a deep breath and having the courage to, now ruin your scene. Well, anyways, let's keep going. Thinking out loud for a second. Um, right now I'm trying to see if I can have my cake and eat it too. Meaning, I like this original version of the idea. And I'm still not convinced that I'm going to use any of this revision at all. I'm just playing right now. This is sandbox mode, right? This is just going a little nutty with the piece and seeing what I can do with it. So, this version, I know this version works. It gets where it needs to go. This came out very naturally. And again, we spoke earlier about the like benefits and hazards of trusting your flow and all that. But it did come out very naturally and kind of, it seems very logical, I guess. I don't have any doubt that this material in its current form that it makes sense. This material is a little scary, and I've already kind of belabored the point about how important it is to do the scary material and all that. The thing that I'm trying to accomplish right now is to see if this very different material can also dovetail into the original version, so that I get this little like diversion moment, but then I still end up kind of seamlessly going back to the original flow and continuing the original journey of the piece. The real hazard, as I see it, and I do get into this like problem at times when I revise, is if I follow this material a lot, it very likely will take me away from the original flow of the piece, like substantially. Excuse me. I might end up writing I could probably easily write a whole page of scherzo-like material based on this idea. I could try that. Some people might say you should do that. I mean, maybe I should just shut up and do it and see what happens. But I know from experience that very likely I could write a whole lot of material that then has taken me further and further and further away from like this. And I would feel like now the piece really is lost, because I don't know how to get back from all this new material that I just wrote to the original flow of the piece. Like, I'm not like, then you're kind of stuck, and I don't know what to do. So I am going to keep exploring it for now, just to see what happens. My eye is on this, is getting back to this relatively quickly. If this starts turning into a whole thing, like if this starts turning into a whole thing on its own, then we'll just see what happens. Again, we're in Joker land now, right? Let's let some chaos happen and just see what happens. Okay, a few thoughts. Um, The way that I'm hearing this skittery chromatic idea right now is kind of like the how should I put it? Okay, so before I describe what the idea sounds like, I should contextualize. I think it's important to personify your music in all kinds of ways. So sometimes those personifications can sound a little funky, a little silly, or a little even nutty. But I think that's important. I think you have to understand music on various levels, including the very dry and lucidly technical and sort of almost mundane, you know, aspects of it. But as a creator, you know, you're not a scholar. You're not, I mean, okay, sorry, I shouldn't say that. Of course, creators are scholars and scholars are creators. What I mean is that your job as the composer is not to really write a scholarly exegesis of like everything that's going on in the piece in technical terms. Your job is to create an interesting piece, really, I think. And so part of that is understanding the music in very sometimes strange sounding ways. So I do that a lot when I'm thinking about music and sometimes with how I describe it. So here's an example. In this moment, it feels like the piece in a way is getting distracted. It feels like it's lost focus a little bit. I'm not sure that that's necessarily a bad thing, however. And also, the temporary diversion from what the piece is really about could actually serve to intensify the the return to the thematic material here. Like basically, it's variety, right? Variety is the spice of life. Variety is the spice of music too. This piece is very focused. I would argue, it's very like kind of about a few things and just about those things. And like the opening 2 pages before I started this revision was a very limited pitch field, and I'm acutely aware of that fact, almost like self-consciously aware of it. And so I was talking to a good friend last night, and a friend that I've known for many years as a musical colleague. He's a great pianist and composer, and so we talk about the creative process quite a lot, and I share my thoughts on my composing with him, and I showed him this piece, and I said, one thing that I have anxiety about with this piece is that the harmonic material is very limited for at least the first couple pages, like the first, like, I don't know, maybe roughly third of the piece, first 2.5 pages, something like that, before it gets into this middle section where it gets a lot more chromatically active. The piece is pretty much limited to basically just the E minor with kind of oscillating between E natural minor and E harmonic minor. Excuse me. And it doesn't really go outside of that for a while. And that is not accidental, and it's not due to like my ears being limited in that way. It's because I wanted the piece to have a certain focus and a certain sound and a certain like commitment or cohesion within a somewhat limited sound world, at least at first. But I don't know how a listener will perceive it. Like, that's sort of outside of my awareness, like ability to perceive. Like, will a listener hear this as this limited sound world, this E minor? It's just saturated with E minor and nothing but that for a while. Does a listener hear that and hear the focus and intensity of the piece? Or do they hear it as kind of like monochromatic and dull and colorless, and like it really needs some harmonic activity, some harmonic spice? And I'm certainly capable of composing that harmonic activity. I guess I could show examples of previous pieces. I'd have to dig around for them. Maybe I could, but for now you'll just, I guess, have to take my word for it that I've written a lot of pieces that are extremely chromatically active, basically atonal, and using all 12 pitches like constantly, like every bar basically, or every, phrase. It's just like every crazy combination of chords and pitches that I can think of. And that has a sound all of its own, right? That's not the sound I'm going for here, but I just wonder, is this a dish that needs a little bit of pepper, of a certain kind of pepper, dropped in at the beginning? That's what I'm experimenting with. I have to write it through and see what it sounds like before I can evaluate. There's no point in speculating any further. So let me finish this idea. Let me just get it to a stopping point, and then I can play the first 2 pages again and see if it works. So I'm almost there. All right, so one thought before I delete these 2 measures. I have fashioned this material, what I'm calling like the chromatic diversion, or however you want to think of it. I have fashioned it so that it will lead back to this bar, which means in order for this new phrase to work, I really think I have to cut these 2 bars. And this is where I was talking about the potential of disrupting the original proportions of the piece. It's not just in adding material, it's also in taking material away. Because here, this is like a phrase with a antecedent consequent relationship. This melody is answered by this melody. So I'll play that. So it's so this is a whole line, and the idea of just amputating the first half of the phrase, it doesn't quite sit right with me, but I don't see a way to make this work otherwise, because I don't want to repeat this idea 4 times. That's too many times. It can only be 3. So, whatever. Again, I'm over talking, overthinking. Let's just cut it and see how it sounds, and then we'll figure it out. So, I'm gonna play. I'm gonna play these first two phrases and see if this new little skittery idea, if it works. Hmm. Hum. It's tough. It's tough to say. Yikes. I don't know yet. I'm gonna have to sleep on it. I'm gonna move on to other parts of the piece and continue trying these new ideas and these sort of scary additions to the piece. For now, I'm gonna leave it and see how I feel about it later. No, that's all I'm gonna say about it for now. I'm gonna leave it and come back to it later. Hold on a second. Just want to make sure I got it right before I move on from it. Like that I notated it right. Do I want accents on these notes? I kind of do. You know, a judicious use of accents can really go a long way in getting the right interpretation of an idea. You don't want to overuse accents. It's kind of an effect in itself, I guess, is when you start overusing accents like crazy, like on purpose, where like every note is accented. That's an effect all on its own. But I mean, like when you have just the right number of accents to kind of show, you know, this. And I think I'm gonna take away the slur because this doesn't have to be too legato. This is almost a semi staccato, maybe. I don't know if I like the triplet though. I need a way. Maybe it shouldn't be 2/4. Maybe it should be 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If it were strictly in tempo, because I'm doing a writ here, which I haven't put in the score, I'd really need to write writ for this to make sense. If I play it strictly in tempo, it's, which is not what I want at all. So I do think I need to change the meter to get more space here. It's probably going to have to be 4/4. Let me think for a second. Maybe it goes to 3/4. I really don't like being too fussy about time signature changes. I never use time signature changes just for the sake of doing them, like to show off that, like, hey, look, I don't have to be stuck in 1 meter. Like I can do, like sometimes, I don't know, maybe I'm unfairly characterizing other composers who've done that. I know that I myself have done that, like where you do a bunch of time signature changes, almost in a self-conscious way, like to show that, look, I'm not some like, you know, I'm not like ignorant when it comes to all the things that you can do with time signatures, right? Like I feel like composers can be very self-conscious about writing a piece that, say, is entirely in 4/4, like this first page, right? where it's like very much in 4/4. This is another thing that I am honestly a little bit self-conscious about with this piece. Besides the relative harmonic simplicity of this opening page, it's also metrically fairly simple. Um, Especially the fact that the melody comes in on the downbeat. And I had thought about doing all kinds of things to like not have that be the case, you know. On the simplest level, I thought maybe this melody wants to actually come in on beat 2, and I thought this could be a more viable version of the melody, and I do kind of like it. I'll start a bar before. But when I played, I thought, no, I really did hear the downbeat as a clear like thing. I had also thought about doing stuff like this, and truthfully, this is one thing I will rail against. I see composers do stuff like this in a way that I think is just really like kind of silly. Like it's like if you're afraid of having something just on the downbeat and having a melody that just starts on the downbeat, you can kind of cheat by doing something like this. Now, arguably, there are composers who do this very intentionally, and I can't paint this with a broad brush, right? Because I know it's all context dependent. I'm not saying that if you see something like this that it's automatically like silly or anything like that. Like there's lots of cases, probably most cases, where it's very intentional and very much necessary. In my case, in this piece, I feel like if I were to do this, I wouldn't feel right about it because I'd be just doing it out of like ego to show that, oh look, no, I'm a clever composer. I use quintuplets, and look, I started on the fourth of the quintuplet, so it's like, aha, like see how clever I am, right? But if you actually play that, does it sound better? Let's try it. I'm going to try to actually play this. I promise it probably will not be precise or accurate, but I'll start here in measure 2 and see if I can play this quintuplet version of the melody. I hate to realize this, but like I don't hate what I just played because the melody coming in a weird, unexpected, not weird, but in a unexpected place in the beat does add a certain kind of urgency and a certain kind of spontaneity to it, right? In a way, you're almost sort of approximating an improvised sound, right? Like the precision of this being the quintuplet rhythm is not really what matters. What really matters is that you're getting a more like free sound, right? Because it's not coming in strictly on the downbeat, like like a quantized like DAW, like everything has to be on this grid, right? You're getting the player to kind of play outside of the meter, so to speak. It's basically what you might call like notated rubato or something like that. So I hate it that I actually kind of like that. Ugh. See, I don't know if other composers struggle with these kinds of things. Maybe other composers are very confident that what they're doing is correct all the time. Sometimes I wish that were the case for me. I wish that I could think, nope, this is it. It can't be any other way. I feel like my life would be easier. I don't know if I'd be writing better music because of it, but I just wrong-headed way of complexifying your music. But then when I actually played it, I thought, wait, it actually, maybe it sounds kind of good. So I wish I could say I had a lot more of these issues settled firmly in my mind, but unfortunately, they're not. Maybe this has something to do with that book I mentioned earlier, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. But I'm going to play it again just to hear that quintuplet thing again. I hate that I kind of like that. Now, okay, see, you can go around and around in circles with these issues forever, because when I had just the downbeat version, here, let's go back to the just the downbeat version. This, you can be afraid of being judged by other composers or whoever, aficionados. You can be afraid of being judged because, oh, look, here's a composer who only knows how to write within the confines of the meter. You know, their melodies are stuck in these prisons of the bar lines, right? It starts on the downbeat and then it goes to the next downbeat, right? And that's how it is. Every melody is, you know, downbeat to downbeat, right? Like what a terribly like limited mindset this composer must have. Okay, so maybe there's some truth to that, or maybe it's not. I don't know. You can worry about it. But then, if I say, here's a way of getting out of that, or at least of starting to get out of that, that restriction, here, I'll have the melody come in with this really funky little pickup thing. Does it really need to be this elaborate, a quintuplet? I don't know. I kind of like it, honestly. If I were to have it be a 16th note, like let's get rid of the quintuplet again. If I were to have it be a 16th note, it would still be kind of stuck in the grid, right? The whole point of this is not just to have it not start on a downbeat, but to have it not be on the grid. Oops. Right? So even this would not really be an improvement to me, per se, even though it's not on the downbeats, because it's still on the 16th note grid. So if I do the quintuplet thing again, oops, where'd my quintuplet go? Well, I think I have to just make it again. I don't think let's just do this. Group 5. Oh, come on, Dorico, don't be like this. See what it's doing? Dorico is... Oh, I do not know how to make a quintuplet that's just on this beat. I guess I have to get rid of this note. Oh my goodness. Dorico is the king of making things difficult that should not be difficult. I don't know if there was a simpler way to do that, but I didn't see it. So there we are. Goodness gracious. Right. So what I was saying about like the fear of being judged is like, now I could be afraid of being judged by a snarky composer who was being snarky the way that I was just being snarky about something like this, going like, oh, look, they just had to do the quintuplet thing just to show how clever they are. When in fact, it's a very legitimate idea, and the effect that it creates is actually like, is audible. It's not just doing it to make your music look more complex on the page, but it's like you actually get a meaningful result from it in the playing of the piece and in the hearing of the piece. How much do you want to like worry about that stuff? I guess, I don't know, it's up to you. Maybe you shouldn't worry about it at all or whatever. I don't know. You probably shouldn't worry about it at all. You should probably just focus on getting the best piece possible no matter what it takes, and then let all the other stuff take care of itself. So, all right, with that said, let's put a slur here. We got the room for it. I said I was going to move on from these first two pages, but I just want to hear this idea one more time. I did change the meter here to 3/4, and I haven't played that yet. So I'm going to play these first two pages again, and then move on to some other revision stuff. I'm getting better at remembering to mute and unmute myself when I'm playing and when I'm talking. Anyways, so I don't see a way to get the inner line in these two bars, or in this bar, because it really needs to be an inner line, like as in it's registrally in between the octaves of the melodies. So the melody's in these octaves, and then the inner line is literally in the middle of those octaves. That's part of what gives it its effect, I guess. And so here in this section, when I introduce it, it works quite well. Like you can hear the inner line as an inner line. Right? I believe you hear that very, very readily. Here it's tricky because the melody leaves a sixth, and also if it's in octaves, there's a very limited range of where the notes could be where they would actually be in between both of these. You see what I mean? You have to find a note. Basically, it would be like the note E or F. You only have those two notes available that's truly in between both of these octaves. So it doesn't quite work with the harmony. Like I'll demonstrate. So it'd be something like this. That's not bad, actually. Maybe that E is going to be really dissonant. And so is the F. I could do a chromatic thing like this. That's getting into that idea is kind of similar to Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue. Let's see, do I remember the section? Hold on. It's been a while since I played this piece, but yeah. So it's oh god, that's so freaking genius. God, I wish I'd written that. It's okay. It's okay. I love that piece so much. So that section in Rhapsody in Blue. So I'm fucking it up. Sorry. So genius. And part of what makes it so effective is that it's the same three notes and it fits in the middle of all of the melody notes. At no point are those three notes above or below the melody. So you do hear it as just this little like corkscrew kind of spinning around, encapsulated by the melody, above and below it. I'm trying to do something similar to that here. Anyways, let me just try some things. I'm gonna shut up. got it. Oops. Down stem voice. We're gonna have it be syncopated like so. This is a bit Gershwin-y. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. It's gonna be like that. It is going to have to go above the melody here. So what was originally supposed to be an inner voice does end up overtaking the melody in a way, so to speak. But I think it'll work. Ugh, actually, I don't know if it works. Oh, that could work. Make it all eighth notes and they all lead down to the next melody note. Like that. That could work. Let's see. It's a little clunky. I don't want mi re do. I don't want 3 blind mice in my piece. 3 blind mice. It's a little too strong of a resolution in B major, though. I'm not going for that. It's not supposed to sound happily arrived in B major here, which is what I'm starting to veer into. This all this problem is because I'm trying to have the inner voice continue. It doesn't have to continue. I can just leave this idea behind, but I'm still going to keep experimenting with it. I think I've got an idea. I think the inner voice should actually go away for this bar and come back in this bar. If you hear this inner voice clearly, then you'll feel its absence in this bar, right? You'll feel like, wait, where did the inner voice go? Like it was this new line that just came out of nowhere. So in this case, it could be a pleasant surprise when it comes back after a measure of rest in this bar, which is where I really want it anyways, because, you know, there's much more room for it, so to speak. Oh yeah, that could work nicely. So boom, da, 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 boom, da, da, yeah, because it could lead to this E. That could be kind of neat. Let's try this. Boom, ba, da, boom, da, da. Might have to change the rhythm. So here, no, down stem. No, down stem voice. Da, da, da. Maybe I'll just do that. Boom, ba, da, da. These slurs don't really have a good place to go. Like that slur obviously is going to need to be fixed. Let me see. Where is it? Oh gosh, there it is. I know that fixing engraving things while you're still composing is always putting the cart before the horse, but sometimes you just need to get it to look right so you can see it. That's not good. Nope. Ah, darn it. That's how it's going to be for now. It's just going to be a very flat slur. This one is much better. Let's have it there. Okay. Let's see how we feel about this idea. With the inner voice. The inner chromatic voice. Oh, I just want to do one thing here. Put the fingering here. It's kind of redundant, but... Yes. Okay. All right. I want to hear this inner voice again. It's all right. My only fear about this inner voice thing is that, um, once again, the mood of the piece changes a little bit due to this. Like this idea that I have so much anxiety about, a big part of the reason why I have anxiety about it is not just the disruption to the form and proportion of the piece, but also it's like a totally different character. And I care a whole lot about a piece having a consistent, clear tone, so to speak. I don't want tonal whiplash. I mean tonal in like a movie sense, right? Um, like if you've ever seen Red Letter Media, the YouTube channel Red Letter Media, their famous reviews of the Plinkett reviews of the Star Wars prequels. Um, One thing that he talks about very insightfully is the tone. I forget which video this is. I think it's for the third Star Wars prequel, Episode 3. Um, at some point in the Plinkett review, Mr. Plinkett talks about the tonal whiplash of the opening of that movie, and he talks about how a movie establishes tone um, effectively, and he gives some famous examples across different genres, different styles. He's like, this movie's a comedy. Like I think he uses Ghostbusters as a comedy. You get it's clearly a comedy, and it establishes the character and the world of the movie all in one scene. And he shows that with Citizen Kane and other movies and stuff. So I kind of apply that idea to music as well. I think that a piece should have a clear tone. And by the way, a piece can have a tone where it's jumping around and it's introducing all these different characters. That in itself is a tone, right? But I think you have to be careful when you have a piece that seems like it's intensely focused on one idea. You get a sense that the piece is going to be consistently of this tone, and then if it starts throwing in these other things, it can feel a little bit disjointed, right? So I don't know yet if that's what I'm doing here. I still have to listen to it more and see how the effect sounds to me. If it sounds like it's getting too disjointed or what, I don't know yet. In any case, this idea with the inner voice also has a similar potential hazard, albeit in a more subtle way. When you have this descending inner chromatic line, it does sound pretty Gershwin. Also, Grieg uses this kind of idea a lot, and it has kind of a nostalgic and sort of gentle, sort of wistful effect, I guess. And this piece is not really nostalgic and wistful. It's sort of intensely focused on the theme of obsessive reiteration of an idea of obsessive, cyclical, turning around and around in a center. Obviously, that's the title of the piece. And by the way, this is probably a good time to read the poem that this piece is based on. I know it by heart, but I'm going to read it just to make sure I get it right. Because a lot of these decisions I'm making about the piece, they can happen in a vacuum, in the sense that I'm evaluating whether or not these are good things for the piece itself, right? Like I'm talking about oh, do I really want this chromatic inner line, just musically speaking? Is that a good choice musically? But I'm also informed by the poem, because this piece is I mean for it to be a programmatic setting of this poem by Rilke. Obviously, it's just a piano piece, so there's no words. I actually have set this poem as an art song before. So the poem, the Panther, I have actually set as a song for soprano and piano. And this is a completely different take on the poem for solo piano, and it's also basically telling the story of the poem in music. So I'm going to read the poem. I use Stephen Mitchell's translation. Let me just read it. So here's the poem, The Panther, that this piece is about. The Panther. His vision from the constantly passing bars has grown so weary that it cannot hold anything else. It seems to him there are 1,000 bars, and behind the bars, no world. As he paces in cramped circles over and over, the movement of his powerful, soft strides is like a ritual dance around a center in which a mighty will stands paralyzed. Only at times, the curtain of the pupils lifts quietly. An image enters in, rushes down through the tensed, arrested muscles, plunges into the heart, and is gone. Right. Pretty devastating poem when you think about it, what it's really about. There's not really a redemption at the end of this poem. I mean, some people read it as kind of like a Zen present moment awareness, like the panther is only like really like aware of things in the immediate instant at which it perceives the thing, right? And it's like you can use it as kind of like this metaphor for like, you know, nirvana, like Zen, like awareness, right? Where it's like you have like perfect, like pure awareness of the present moment and like nothing else and all that kind of stuff. I tend to see it more as a metaphor for, well, like literally being in captivity, right? The panther is literally in a cage. And I think that Rilke was making a point not really about present moment awareness, but about the sort of destruction of one's perception that comes through captivity. And of course he could be making this point only about, you know, an animal in a cage, literally, you know, a panther in a cage. I think it's a pretty short step to making the argument about, you know, human beings in captivity in various forms, like in prison or in bondage in various forms. Knowing Rilke and knowing what he was about, I think he probably wanted this captivity to encompass like emotional states as well, like a captive heart. Like if your heart is somehow imprisoned in a barrier, behind barriers of things like hate, right, or grief, or loneliness and solitude, right? Like I think Rilke maybe sees like the human condition as akin to this panther, that like as a human being, your heart, your soul is continually trapped in these cages, in these prisons, where it basically has no choice but to kind of pace around in circles, you know, around the same point, and anything that it sees on the outside vanishes instantly. So it's very sad. It's a very tragic poem in my reading of it. So the piece, the I'm trying to capture the story of the poem and what it's about. The piece also has to be similarly tragic and kind of nihilistic, hopefully without it being too gloomy and depressing or whatever. But I have to be kind of careful about ideas that get too playful, too colorful. Again, going back to this idea that I'm so nervous about. It sounds a little bit like 8-bit video game music for a second. You know, it has a little bit of like a Mario, like, you know, like NES video games sound, just a tiny bit. That's, you might think that's way off, but that's kind of how I perceive an idea like this. I hear that as something Mario-ish. Yeah. That's what I wanted. Oh. Sorry, this is why I keep getting messed up on this idea. This is supposed to come on the 8th note. Be syncopated. There we go. There we go. That's it. Yeah. So I love this idea. I really like this. I still don't know if it's the right idea for this piece. We'll see. like, now that you know, if you're watching this, now that you know what the piece is like really about, I guess you could also wonder, like, do you hear the panther pacing in circles behind bars in this idea? Maybe not. I do think I've captured that here, everything up to that, and I do think I've captured it, everything after it. This idea, as much as I like how it enlivens the piece, I'm also afraid that it detracts from the message of the piece and almost maybe cheapens the piece a little bit. But again, even as I'm voicing all these doubts, I can always sort of see it the other way too. Like, well, no, musically it's kind of neat. So we're just gonna have to sleep on it. Time and perspective generally brings clarity to these issues. So we're gonna leave it for now. The chromatic idea, or the inner voice idea, I'm also unconvinced, but let's move on. This is the point, right? This is what I said at the beginning. The Joker, break your rules, right? I have all these rules that I think will save me. To borrow a line from the scene again, I have all these rules that you think will save you. You're going to have to break your rule to get to the truth. That's what we're trying to do right now, right? Breaking your own rules doesn't feel good. That's kind of why you have those rules. So if you're going to break them, you got to be ready to really do it. Go all the way. All right. Let's see what else we can find in this piece. What other little nuggets might be lurking in it? Truthfully, I don't really want to touch anything here. This section, I'm going to leave it. I like this section way too much. I do not want to mess with it. I don't want to risk messing it up. I'm quite happy with it. The climax, I've still considered doing more with this climax. So, that might be a good place to start then. Let's see what we can do with this climax. So I'm trying to see if I can fit the opening motive of this whole section, this ascending 3-note motive. I'm trying to see if I can like fit it into the inner voice in the left hand, because one thing that I've never really liked about this climax that's always kind of bothered me is that the inner voice just goes away. It just disappears, and it doesn't, the melody never really finishes, so to speak. Like, it just kind of stops here. I guess you could say that like the G sharp is on the G sharp at the top of each chord is like the last note of the melody, and then the texture kind of takes over and stuff. So like if this were a song, for example, the singer would sing everything here from this C sharp all the way through this section, all of these inner note stuff. This is all one long continuous melody, unbroken melody. And then it would get up to here, this G sharp, and then that would be the conclusion of the melody. Basically, then they would stop, and like the accompaniment, you know, the orchestra or whatever would then play for a while. That's how I've kind of heard it in my mind, and I thought that does make sense. Like the melody does have to stop somewhere. Well, maybe that's debatable, but for what I want at this moment in the piece, that melody does have to find a place to conclude, basically, so that it can go on to the other things. So I thought this is where it's going to be, and it's also going to be the climax, or at least the point of like the biggest like sound, you know, kind of killing two birds with one stone, so to speak. That's not how I planned it, but it's just how it came out, and I thought, hey, that works pretty nicely. I concluded my melody, and I have this big like fireworks moment that lets me get into this like retransition material. So I don't know, it might be too clever by half to try to keep sticking the melody in here. Like too clever by half as in like it could be cool, but it also could be like not really necessary and not really accomplishing anything. I have to keep playing with it and see if I can make it work. Yeah. All right, I see how this can develop. I'm almost kind of tapped out in terms of creative energy right now. So I'm going to just get this idea on the page and then call it a day for now. And I think I've gotten enough interesting revisions that I can come back to the piece later and really see it with fresh eyes and see if the direction that I'm going is working, because it's theoretically possible that I could open up the piece even more after all this and say, wow, these revisions really add a lot of color and whatever to the piece. So let's get this one as the last kind of major rethinking moment, and then we'll come back to it later. So this is going to be a little tricky because it's going to involve quite a bit of renotation. Maybe I can make it simple. Unfortunately, I have to get rid of these glorious chords. That's the thing that I don't like about this revision. It's not going to work with the chords, really. I have to prioritize the melody in order to make it work, I think. Also, this, no bass there. By the way, this is a little bit of a clever technique, and I'm not doing it to be clever. I'm doing it because it works. Notice how the melody in the left hand is in octaves here, including this beat. Like the chord still has the octave of the melody, but here there is no octave. And I've seen other composers do this, and it kind of used to bother me because I'm like, no, you're getting rid of your lower octave. But the listener doesn't really perceive it that way. I don't think the listener hears that, this melody note is missing its lower octave companion that was there for all the other ones. It's kind of a fun little trick that you can do. And it's the same thing here, by the way. Like, this melody note doesn't have a lower octave, right? Then it does here, and we have octave, 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 octave. And then here, the melody note is just the top note of the chord. But your ear, your ear doesn't really mind, if that makes sense. You still hear the melody clearly. So, cool little trick, if you want to call it a trick. What am I actually hearing here? I do want it to be a sequence. Sequences! That would change this whole thing. Fuck. Oh no. That's gonna really throw things way out of balance. Oh no. Can I keep this harmony and still have the melody? My brain's starting to hurt. I'm starting to get too much compositional fatigue. I need to take a break. That's another lesson from a teacher who I've referenced many times. He said, don't force yourself to compose when you're tired. Like, yes, have discipline, all that stuff. Like, compose even when it's not easy. Compose even when you're feel like you don't have the time. Like, all that stuff. But don't push through mental fatigue. I mean, unless there's always exceptions, right? Unless you have to meet a deadline and all this other stuff. But generally, if you're working according to your kind of ideal process, once you start to feel like, this is, I'm not feeling it. Like, you should listen to your body and step away. You know what I mean? It's the same as any other endeavor. Like, I like to exercise. I'm into lifting weights and other things, and there's a very fine line with weightlifting. Where you do have to push to a point of some discomfort, and everyone kind of feels that differently and stuff. But you do need to push to where it's you feel the push, feel the burn, or whatever. But you also can't. You don't want to injure yourself, and you don't want to like do things dangerously, like with bad form and all these other things, right? So that's where you kind of have to learn to listen to your body physically. And with composing, it's the same way. You have to listen to your mind. When your mind is telling you, I really think it's time to step away from this, take a break, then you need to respect that. So I've reached that point with my work for today, and that means we're also going to finish live streaming. So it's probably all for now. If you watch this entire live stream, you deserve a prize. I guess that's it. Thanks for watching.